Well, if the New York Mets didn't have the best starting rotation in baseball before, they certainly do now that they've traded for All-Star Chris Bassitt from the Oakland Athletics. Going to give you a full breakdown of the trade on this special edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans who are watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. I just wrote a piece about the Chris Bassitt trade that you can find at justbaseball.com or by going to my Twitter. I also have a free agent tracker that I've been updating throughout MLB free agency, giving you the latest on all the moves that have been happening around the league. And there's a lot of moves. Jeurys Familia is a Philly, and that's something that we can talk about maybe at another time because the New York Mets just traded for All-Star Chris Bassitt. First stat I want to throw at you. Since the 2019 season, over the last 3 years, Chris Bassitt has a 3.26 ERA. That is the 10th best mark in baseball among pitchers who have thrown at least 350 innings. This is a really good starting pitcher. And the Mets end up going to the trade market to land that starter we knew they wanted when they could have gone to free agency. There's been other deals that have happened so far. Carlos Rodon got a 2-year, $44 million deal. You had Yusei Kikuchi sign a 3-year deal. I believe that was worth $36 million. So there were some options, Kikuchi at $12 million over 3 years, $12 million per, that is. You could have had Rodon who went to the Giants for $22 million, and there was an opt-out in that contract. So it could have just been a 1-year, $22 million deal or a 2-year, $44 million deal. That would have been just money. And in this deal, the Mets did send pitching prospects, and they don't have a lot of pitching prospects. So if you want to be pessimistic today, and we can do that, or we will do that maybe, as we'll break down the prospect side of this a little bit later on the show today, but I cannot be pessimistic about the Mets dealing starting pitchers when they are aiming to win now. That is the bottom line if you're a Mets fan. The only thing that you have to take from this trade is the New York Mets just added an all-star. Their starting rotation right now has 4 all-stars in it. The only one who has not made an all-star appearance is Carlos Carrasco. And you've seen me defend Carrasco many times throughout this offseason because if you look at his stats, through a good portion of his career, he was a top 15 starting pitcher in baseball, no doubt about it, based on the statistics during his time in Cleveland. So if you get a bounce back from Carrasco, if Taijuan Walker pitched like the first half version of himself, and then you have your top 3 the way it is, this rotation is by far the best in baseball. Let me be honest here. There's other rotations that are really good. The Giants, who I just mentioned, who signed Rodon, have an awesome rotation. But I look at the ceiling of this Mets team when you have deGrom and Scherzer as your 1 and 2. And now you add Bassitt as your 3. Bassitt was really the ace of that Oakland team, and they have a lot of good pitchers out there, but this is a really good move. You now have a deep rotation. Suddenly, Tyler McGill, David Peterson probably have no chance to start anywhere but in Syracuse unless there's an injury, or if someone like McGill who has stuff that could play up transitions into the bullpen. There's a lot of arms. You also have Jordan Yamamoto and Trevor Williams. So there's the depth on this team when it comes to starters should not be questioned. Even when they send out Adam Oller, who was on the 40-man roster, that is not significant starter depth as opposed to what you just added in Chris Bassitt, who again was an all-star last season and has pitched to a 3.26 ERA over the last 3 years. This is a pitcher that I think has much less injury concern than Carrasco and deGrom heading into the season because he's coming off a healthy year. Bassitt is over 5 years removed now from Tommy John surgery. So he's at this point where he has, developed a routine since the surgery. He has been able to stay on the mound and be a productive, above average starting pitcher. That's exactly what the Mets needed. And you get it without giving up too much when it comes to prospects. They did give up JT Ginn and Adam Oller, and I'll talk about that in a minute because that is a hefty price in some respects, because Bassitt is only on a 1-year deal, or only has 1 year left, I should say, before free agency. Still, you look at the net result of this, and you are adding a all-star to a rotation that already had deGrom and Scherzer. That is a fantastic day if you're a Mets fan. So we'll talk about what the Mets are sending out in just a minute. But first, I want to tell you about the best tasting protein bar ever, which of course is Built Bar. Built Bars are so delicious, and I also love their new puffs, which are the first ever protein-infused marshmallows. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy, they come covered in 100% real chocolate. They have great flavors like the cinnamon churro, coconut marshmallow, the banana cream pie. If you're talking about the regular, normal Built Bars, there's great flavors like mint brownie, cookies and cream, which is my personal favorite, coconut almond. Built is always coming out with new flavors, so make sure you check their site often to see what's new. And once you're there at built.com, also use our promo code locked on to receive 15% off your next order. Again, that's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. All right, so let's talk a little bit here about the package the Mets sent out because it is significant. We've talked about JT Ginn a lot this offseason. The Mets do not have a ton of really good pitching prospects, and Ginn was one of them. They drafted him in the second round of the 2020 draft. He was really that next arm that you could count on to maybe be an answer in this rotation for, 6 years if he debuted and was able to thrive at the big league level. So that is a tough pill to swallow here. Absolutely. And you look at what he did last season, coming off Tommy John surgery himself. And Ginn, he started in low A, ended up in high A. Altogether, he pitched to a 3.03 ERA in 18 starts. He's 22 years old. He doesn't have the highest ceiling. I don't know if Ginn could ever become a Bassitt. And that's probably the best possible thing because Bassitt is not a pitcher that relies on high velocity. Ginn, not going to be a pitcher like that either. So maybe if everything breaks right for you, he could have been a Bassitt one day. But realistically, what scouts tell us, if you talk to or if you listen to the podcast I did with Arm Layton, who does a lot of great prospect stuff at Just Baseball, he said, the ceiling was like a 4-starter when it comes to JT Ginn. He had a high floor, which is great to be able to potentially have a cost-controlled back-end starter. But what you're getting is something that the Mets desperately needed for this season. You have to pay a premium to get a pitcher like Bassitt. And in this case, Ginn was that premium. When it comes to Ollr, this is another pitching prospect that I don't want to just shrug off as not a loss to the system because he is. He's a very good pitcher. He was in my top 20 when we were ranking the Mets farm system over the last couple of weeks here. At the same time, 27 years old. So he is older when it comes to being a prospect. He did have a good season last year, ended up beginning the year in Double-A where he pitched to an ERA just over 4, gets called up to Triple-A where he had a 2.45 ERA in 8 starts, was added to the 40-man roster. So he was probably going to make some appearance with the Mets this season had they not traded him. But again, you're talking about one of these guys that in all likelihood could be one of those pitchers that is up and down, could be the next version of like a Corey Oswalt who still has talent. I actually like Corey Oswalt, but again, when you're talking about what you've acquired here in Chris Bassitt, you do this trade 10 times out of 10 when you're a team that's trying to win. And that's just the bottom line. You have to make this move. There's no other way around it if you're trying to win. And look, the fact is there's other moves the Mets could have made, right? Could they have gone out and signed one of those other guys I mentioned, Rodon or Kikuchi? Absolutely. But I look at those two signings, right? With Rodon, it would have cost you a little bit more when it comes to money. But the injury concern for me is just massive with Rodon. I mean, he was great last season. He is a better pitcher than Bassitt if they're both healthy, but the track record is much smaller. And down the stretch of the season, he broke down. You look at Kikuchi. I mean, not a bad pitcher, but his ERA was over, was it 4.41, I believe, off the top of my head. I know it was in the mid fours last season with the Mariners. A good pitcher, but not really a great pitcher. Bassitt can be a great pitcher for the Mets next season. And I look at him and Carrasco in the middle of that rotation, and I just imagine the Mets getting to a point where you make it into the playoffs this year. And if everyone's firing on all cylinders, the idea that you can go into a rotation and your 1 through 4 is Jacob deGrom, Max Scherzer, Chris Bassitt, and Carlos Carrasco. That is a veteran staff that can win a championship. It's just that simple. So because of that, again, this is a no-brainer. Now, I will check right now and do another scroll through Twitter and see if there's any other Mets news to report on before we close out the show today. And obviously, there could be other special Locked On Mets podcasts throughout the weekend here if the Mets remain active, which we expect them to be. Before we look into that, I want to tell you that football might be over for the season, but basketball is in full steam for both pro and college hoops. And from all the latest odds, totals, player performance props, to where the next fire coach is going to land, BetOnline.net is the number one spot for all of your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, baseball, and UFC odds right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, so as I have checked Twitter at about 8:45 p.m. on Saturday night, there is no other news to report on. That can change very quickly, at least as it relates to this episode. That is all to cover. But where we stand now with this Mets team, what's left for them to do? I'll tell you, when it comes to the rotation, that's locked in. I mean, other than a minor league signing, just to add some depth, like an invite to camp, you're not going to add another starting pitcher. The bullpen still is a concern that has to be addressed. I mean, you have to replace an Aaron Loop, but I just look at the pitching this team has overall, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around Bassitt being a Met now. But you look at that starting rotation, you look at the bullpen that still has Edwin Diaz, Seth Lugo, Trevor May, Miguel Castro, Drew Smith. There are arms out there that are really talented. Yeah, you're one signing away here, one or two. Andrew Chafin still out there, Ryan Tepera still out there, Kenley Jansen still out there. Those were the big three when it came to the relievers on the market. Also, the Mets have interest in reuniting with Colin McHugh, who had a great season. We've talked about him throughout this offseason as well. So there are other signings that can still be made here to bolster that bullpen. There's still potentially some trades in the works. One of the things that did not happen that I kind of was expecting as the past couple of days have transpired here is the Mets are clearly still shopping J.D. Davis, Dominic Smith, and Jeff McNeil in some capacity. I hope they hang on to McNeil because I think that he is going to be the best option to not only be your starting second baseman, but to provide you that utility aspect where he can start in left field or right field if you need him to. He can play some third base. I would keep McNeil, but Davis and Dominic Smith can certainly still be traded. I would welcome those trades if it made this roster fit a little bit better, clear up some spots on the bench, maybe a spot for a Mark Vientos, who I continue to campaign for as a DH option. Or if the Mets want to even make another signing when it comes to the position player front, a trade would probably have to happen first. Maybe you can now deal a Davis or a Smith for some prospects and replenish that farm a little bit. I thought there was a pretty decent shot that the Mets might have been able to trade one of those players to get a real starting pitcher that could factor into this rotation. But instead, they went the prospect route to acquire Bassitt because Oakland likely was more interested in that than, a couple of players who are already into arbitration when it comes to J.D. Davis and Dominic Smith. And they probably wanted some more arms to replenish what they're losing here, not only in Bassitt, but they're also apparently shopping some of their other starting pitchers. So when I look at what's left now, you can still make a move here with one of those guys, and I would expect one of them to get traded this weekend. We'll see what happens there. And there's still, of course, some other free agents looming the Mets could pounce on. We can't count Steve Cohen out, and we certainly can't count out Billy Epler, who is really just having a fan. See, he's got me flustered. I'm so impressed with him. He's had a fantastic first offseason running this Mets team, so I'm excited to see what he does next. Anyway, though, that's going to be all for this special edition of Locked On Mets. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. You can find some of my work on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan or at justbaseball.com. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On MLB. Sully will have you covered with everything else that's going on in Major League Baseball. You can follow Locked On MLB wherever you get podcasts.